And let's dig further into that headline with Professor Thitinan Pongsudhirak from the Institute of Security and International Studies at Chulalongkorn University. Professor, thank you very much for joining us today. So ASEAN has just released a statement strongly condemning the airstrike, but pressure again is being put on the bloc to do more than just issue these statements. Will growing calls from the international community spur ASEAN to change its strategy?
The short answer is unlikely. I mean, the most recent statement was caused by this the latest outrage, a global outrage at Myanmar's military's airstrikes against innocent civilians in Sagaing region. It has killed at least 133 people. So it has caused a kind of a global outrage now. People can see that the civil war and the violence and the coup going back 2 years ago has devastated the country, has led to atrocities, heinous crimes, murders. And this is a military government perpetrating violence against its own people. So ASEAN has been the key, I think, framework to mitigate and find a way to for dialogue and way forward out of this crisis and violence. But it has been ineffectual. The ASEAN 5-point consensus has not worked. Indonesia's chairmanship, a lot of hype and hope on it, but it's very slow and not making a forward movement. So I think there's a lot of global frustration now about ASEAN. Initially the international community deferred to ASEAN to deal with Myanmar, the coup and the crisis. But now that ASEAN proves impotent, ineffectual, I think the global efforts might have to go beyond ASEAN.
Okay, so you don't think their behavior will change at this point. So more broadly, do you think the world needs to change the way it perceives ASEAN? Some observers argue that it's not a moral vehicle and that it should be extracted from the crisis. So how much responsibility does the bloc have when it comes to Myanmar at this point?
Well, it depends on what the bloc, how the bloc pitches itself. This is an ASEAN of 10 member states, but one has gone rogue. And the Myanmar military government has proven that it does not care what ASEAN says and stands for. It has ignored the 5-point consensus, even though it signed on to it. It has ignored all the statements, all the calls for the end of violence and all of that. So I think now ASEAN is at a juncture where it has to make some hard choices. Does it keep keep the Myanmar military government within the fold, within the grouping, or it takes measures, more drastic measures, to isolate the regime and regroup around a core ASEAN that can still be respected and workable in the eyes of the international community. I mean, we're seeing more global outrage, global calls for something to be done in Myanmar, and ASEAN is a key vehicle, but ASEAN has not been able to do anything. So I think more and more we might see the international community taking other measures above and beyond what ASEAN can do.
I want your thoughts on the impact of these latest strikes. So Min Aung Hlaing claims elections will be held later this year, but only once the country is stable, as he says. Is the military airstrike another sign that promised elections are unlikely to happen?
Well, the airstrikes, have been designed to intimidate and terrorize population into submission. It's very clear. But at the same time, it's also clear that the People's Defense Force, all these militias, and there's a people's uprising against Myanmar coup and crisis. Remember, also they had a legitimate democratic election in November 2020, and the civilian leadership won that election. The Myanmar military basically unplug the country from progress, reform, and opening up. So the airstrikes are designed to make it a fait accompli. And then the election, of course, is a sham from the outset. It cannot be considered with any legitimacy. So, I mean, basically, the Myanmar military, they want to first subdue the uprising, make people submit to it, and then go on with election, legitimize its rule. So this has to be opposed, and it's being opposed in Myanmar. I think the key thing now moving forward, Teresa, is the battlefield. I mean, the battlefields are determining the fate of Myanmar's political future. And, with these airstrikes at will, the Myanmar opposition, civilian opposition resistance coalition, they need anti-aircraft capabilities to have a level playing field there. Otherwise, it's unjust and unfair war that's being perpetrated against them.
You talk about the battlefield, Professor, but ASEAN is set to hold a summit next month. And on the agenda, we believe, are discussions around organizing efforts to mediate with military generals. Would this approach legitimize the government? Is it going to buy the generals more time to refuel, or could this approach actually be constructive?
You know, the military generals, the Tatmadaw, led by Senior General Min Aung Hlaing, they are playing a one-sided game. All the actions, all the negotiations are under their terms. So they're not, it's not a ball game that is inclusive. It's either their game or no game. So I think it's very clear that ASEAN has to do something else, different. And so far it has been unwilling to do so. At the same time, ASEAN also risks going the wrong direction here. I mean, some ASEAN member states are condoning and even coddling the military government with kinds of meetings and giving them space, giving them legitimacy. So this is something that is a deep, deep existential crisis for ASEAN about what to do with Myanmar. The worst thing could be that they would just condone and kind of approve this military government's perpetration of violence against its own people. So something here that we have to look for Indonesia to do something faster and stronger. It's too little, too late now. It's April now to have an effective chairmanship, but Indonesia needs to do more. And next year we have Laos. So, this lowest common denominator is getting lower and lower still. And this means the Myanmar crisis is going to spiral, and ASEAN will lose so much credibility that it will be irrelevant in the eyes of the international community.
The pressure is on Indonesia. Thank you very much, Professor, for your insights and your time. That was Professor Thitinan Pongsudhirak from Chulalongkorn University's Institute of Security and International Studies.